He plays Jesus for the world. But when the cameras stop rolling, Jonathan Roumie walks back to an empty home. No family waiting at the door, no wife to talk to, no children to laugh with. Millions see his face, but almost no one sees the silence he returns to. Playing Christ gave him a platform, but it also gave him something else: loneliness. He gave his life to faith, and in return, he was set apart. Admired by many, deeply respected, but still utterly alone. You'd think that someone who inspires so many hearts would have someone to hold his. But the truth about why Jonathan Roumie is still single, why love has slipped through his fingers again and again, goes far deeper than you'd ever expect. And once you hear it, it might just break your heart. Playing Jesus in The Chosen made Jonathan Roumie a global icon. His portrayal of Christ touched millions. Fans sobbed, prayed, and reconnected with their faith because of him. But off-screen, away from the sets and bright lights, Jonathan's own heart remains burdened. Because while the world sees a man full of grace and purpose, few realize what that role has cost him. Fame came fast and heavy, and with it came a storm of rumors, questions, and unrealistic expectations. Is he married? Does he have kids? Is he secretly dating someone? People wanted to know everything. But even as whispers swirled, the truth remained painfully simple. Jonathan is single. Not just today or last year. He's been walking this path alone for years. Despite being 50, handsome, deeply kind, and spiritually grounded, he hasn't found someone to share his life with. And it's not for lack of trying. Jonathan has spoken about this in recent interviews, sharing his heartbreak, not with bitterness, but with honesty. He said it's been difficult, not just because he's in the spotlight, but because he has changed. The man he was before, The Chosen, is not the man he is today. There was a time when he chose acting jobs for money. He dated without thinking too deeply about shared beliefs. He didn't prioritize faith in relationships. But after The Chosen, everything changed. Jonathan began to see himself differently. He saw his work not just as acting, but as a calling. And with that transformation came a painful realization that most of his past relationships weren't built on the foundation he needed. They were built on attraction, timing, circumstance, but not faith. And as Jonathan grew closer to God, those connections began to crumble. He couldn't continue living the same way, pretending faith didn't matter. He knew, deep in his heart, that if God wasn't at the center of his relationships, they would always fall apart. And so he made a decision, a terrifying, isolating, but necessary decision. He would wait. He would not settle. He would search only for someone who shared his values, who understood what it meant to walk in faith, not just on Sundays, not just during prayer, but every single day. This isn't a romantic ideal, it's his reality. Jonathan shared in interviews how hard it's been to find someone who matches that level of devotion. He said he often feels alone, not because he's unlovable, but because the spiritual path he's chosen is narrow, and few walk it. He talked about moments when the loneliness hits him hard. After filming emotional scenes, when the weight of portraying Jesus crushes him emotionally, he has no one to come home to. He sometimes shuts down, not knowing how to talk to people after being immersed in such sacred work. Imagine that. Giving everything to your craft, delivering performances that stir millions, and then sitting alone in a quiet room, feeling emotionally spent, spiritually hungry, and completely alone. That's what Jonathan lives through. And yet, he doesn't blame anyone. He doesn't wallow in self-pity. He acknowledges that this is part of the cost. He chose this path, and he believes that eventually, someone will come, someone who understands the burden of faith, the weight of divine purpose, and the discipline of a life lived with spiritual integrity. But for now, he waits. And waiting can be excruciating. Jonathan Roumie didn't always live like this. There was a time when faith wasn't the foundation of his life. It was just a quiet undercurrent, not the compass. He worked in New York and LA, took acting jobs based on what paid the bills, and didn't think twice about whether the projects had meaning beyond entertainment. He dated like most people do, chasing chemistry, connection, and companionship without questioning whether those relationships were aligned with God's will. But when The Chosen came into his life, something shifted. Suddenly he wasn't just playing Jesus. He was learning from him, The more he immersed himself in the role, the more it pulled him inward, forcing him to confront who he was and who he wanted to be. He started asking deeper questions. Am I living a life that reflects what I believe? Am I honoring God not just in my career, but in my private decisions, my romantic life, my friendships, my habits? And the answer was a painful no. That realization sparked what he now calls a transformation, a surrender. He chose to stop making decisions based on success, popularity, or desire, and instead started making every choice through the lens of his faith. That meant turning down roles. That meant leaving certain social circles. That meant walking away from relationships that didn't share his vision of a God-centered life. He admits now that he used to think holiness wasn't for someone like him, that it was reserved for priests, saints, and quiet old women who spent their days in prayer. But when his heart changed, he saw it differently. Holiness wasn't about perfection, it was about priority. I wasn't trying to be a saint before, he said. Now I am. That one sentence holds the weight of his entire journey, because trying to be a saint doesn't mean you succeed every day. It means you live every day with that intention. And that intention changed how he approached love. Jonathan realized he couldn't date casually anymore. He couldn't be with someone who only half believed in God, or who was okay with faith being a side dish rather than the main course. He needed a partner who was also on the journey. Not someone perfect, but someone trying. Someone who understood that prayer isn't just a moment. It's a lifestyle. That intimacy means more than affection. It means spiritual alignment. So he started saying no more often. He stopped entertaining connections that didn't lead toward God. And in doing that, he chose something brave and rare in today's world. He chose to be alone rather than be with the wrong person. It's a decision that hurts. He has confessed that the silence is loud, that the longing is real. But he believes that in the waiting, God is doing something, preparing him, shaping him, maybe even preparing someone else for him. And that hope is what carries him forward, even when the loneliness feels unbearable. For someone who has become a spiritual icon to millions, Jonathan Roumie lives with a quiet pain most never see. The more people admire him, the more isolated he becomes. Fame often brings community, but in Jonathan's case, it's created distance. Not because he thinks he's above others, but because people project so much onto him. They see him as Jesus, not Jonathan. They assume he's holy, untouchable, flawless. But Jonathan has made it clear. He's not Jesus. He plays him. And playing him has changed him, yes, but it's also made everyday life harder. He can't walk into a room without someone whispering, watching, or judging. He can't go on a normal date without the other person feeling like they have to live up to an impossible standard. Even among other Christians, he often feels like he's carrying something too heavy to explain. And as he's grown spiritually, the gap between himself and others has grown too. Because spiritual growth, especially the kind that reorders your whole life, often means walking alone for long stretches. He said it himself. He can't date like he used to. He can't even live like he used to. That change, as beautiful as it is, comes at a cost. And perhaps the most painful part of all of this is knowing that he's ready. Ready for love. Ready for partnership. Ready to share his heart with someone who gets it. Someone who doesn't just tolerate his prayer life, but joins him in it. Someone who sees the hours he spends recording audio for Hollow or memorizing lines from scripture and says, I understand. I believe too. But despite being ready, the person hasn't come. And that's the heartbreak. That's the waiting. Not the passive kind, but the kind that aches while still trusting. Jonathan has said that sometimes it feels like he's been carved out, emptied, made into a vessel. And that's exactly what this season of his life is. A preparation. But preparation doesn't make the loneliness any easier. It doesn't soften the sting of watching others find love while he waits. It doesn't erase the exhaustion he feels after filming a brutal scene and realizing there's no one to talk to, no one to decompress with, no one who truly understands what it means to give your life to a calling like this. And so he prays. He waits. He shows up. And he trusts that God sees the ache behind his smile, the longing behind his stillness. Jonathan's not broken. He's just been set apart. And sometimes, being set apart feels like being left behind. But in God's story, being set apart always means being saved for something greater. Jonathan Roumie's loneliness isn't just about romantic longing. It's not simply a man feeling sad because he doesn't have a wife or children. His solitude goes much deeper into the quiet chambers of the soul where the heart wrestles with purpose, identity, and surrender. His loneliness is the kind that comes when a person has chosen to live a life set apart from the world, yet still longs for human connection. It's the cost of spiritual clarity. The more Jonathan seeks to draw near to God, the more distant he feels from the crowd. It's a paradox that many believers understand, but rarely speak of. The strange pain of choosing holiness and then realizing that the path is narrower than you thought, that fewer people walk it with you than you hoped. When Jonathan says he can't date like he used to, it's not about self-righteousness. It's about protection. He's guarding something sacred, a life that's finally aligned with truth. He's not willing to compromise that. Not anymore. And that decision has made him vulnerable in a world that celebrates convenience, not conviction. If you look closely at his interviews, you'll notice how often he pauses before answering. He doesn't rush his words. That's because what he says isn't filtered through public relations or fame strategy. It's filtered through prayer, through conscience, through soul-searching. He's careful not because he's hiding, but because he wants to honor the gravity of what he's been through. He talks about surrender like it's a daily practice, not a one-time choice. He talks about love not as romance, but as a reflection of divine intimacy. And that's what makes his current state so deeply moving. Jonathan is living in a holy tension. On one side, he has the calling, the mission, the ministry, the platform. On the other side, he has the ache, the desire to be seen, to be known, to be loved in the most human of ways. Not by an audience, not by fans, but by one person who sees the man behind the beard, the voice behind the prayers, the soul behind the actor. And the tragedy is that so many people admire him, but so few truly understand him. Think about how many people say they want a good man, a kind man, a faithful man. Jonathan is all of that. And yet, he's still alone. Why? Because being good in this world is often reduced to manners or charm. But Jonathan's version of good is radical. It means fasting. It means waking up early to pray. It means turning down lucrative roles that don't align with his values. It means choosing discomfort over compromise. That kind of goodness isn't always attractive. Not at first. It's confronting. It challenges people to examine themselves, and not everyone is ready for that. He once said that he used to think relationships could work even if the other person didn't share his faith, that he could live and let live. But now he knows that doesn't work. Not for him. Because love, for Jonathan, is no longer just about connection. It's about covenant. He needs someone who's not just loving him, but walking with him toward Christ. Someone who isn't just supportive of his journey, but who is on the journey too. And that's what makes his story so important. Because it's not just his story. It's ours. How many of us have tried to live with one foot in faith and one foot in the world, only to find ourselves split down the middle? How many of us have compromised our convictions for the sake of love, only to end up more alone than before? Jonathan's honesty is a mirror. It reflects the part of us that knows there's a better way, a more honest way, but that fears the cost, because it is costly to say no when the world says yes, to wait when everyone tells you to settle, to believe that God has someone for you, even when the years keep passing. That kind of faith isn't easy. It's excruciating, but it's also liberating. Jonathan has chosen to be free, even if that freedom feels like loneliness. He's chosen to live a life of depth, not distraction. And though it may seem like he's waiting for someone else to show up, maybe the truth is he's already become the person he was waiting for. And yet, he's still human. There are nights that feel too quiet, holidays that remind him of what's missing. He watches friends get married, hold babies, celebrate anniversaries, and though he rejoices for them, he feels the absence in his own life more sharply. He scrolls through pictures of smiling couples and wonders if that will ever be him. He finishes recording a deeply emotional scene as Jesus walks off the set still carrying the weight of the cross in his soul and finds no one waiting at home. Just silence, just solitude, just stillness. And it's in that stillness that he often hears the voice of God most clearly. That's the part we don't always see. The sacredness of the sorrow, the holiness of the heartbreak, the intimacy of being alone with God in a way that few people ever truly experience. Jonathan's loneliness has become his sanctuary. It hurts, but it also heals. So many people want to know, when will Jonathan find love? But maybe the better question is, what is God doing in this season of waiting? Maybe it's not about what's missing, but about what's being formed. Patience, strength, clarity. Surrender. Maybe Jonathan's story is reminding us all that love doesn't always look like marriage. Sometimes it looks like devotion in the dark, like faith without proof, like obedience without applause. And when the time is right, when the person is right, when both hearts are ready, maybe then the waiting won't feel so long. But until that day comes, Jonathan walks forward in the quiet, clinging to the only relationship that's never failed him. The one with the one who sees every tear, every prayer, every lonely night, and calls it holy. Jonathan Roumie's journey may look lonely from the outside, but what if it's preparing him for something bigger than we can see? What if all the silence, all the heartbreak, all the unanswered prayers are not signs of God's absence, but signs of his preparation? Because this isn't a story about sadness, it's a story about sanctification. It's not about a man who's been forgotten. It's about a man who's being refined. The world sees Jonathan and asks, why is he still alone? But heaven may be asking, can you see what I'm building in him? This is a man who has surrendered everything: comfort, romance, fame, even rest. And through that surrender, he has become a vessel for something greater. His loneliness is not a punishment, it's a proving ground, a sacred space where his faith becomes more than words. It becomes his entire way of life. That's the kind of strength most people never develop because they never wait long enough to receive it. But Jonathan is still waiting, still trusting, still showing up for the calling God placed on his life. Even when that calling costs him everything, there's something breathtaking about someone who chooses to walk alone rather than walk away from God. That's what Jonathan is doing. He could have taken shortcuts. He could have chosen the easy love, the casual connection, the close enough relationship. But he didn't. He chose truth. He chose to be unequally yoked with no one. And even though it's painful, even though it makes his nights quiet and his soul ache, he's still here, still choosing faith, still playing Jesus not just on screen, but in the way he lives. And that decision, that sacred commitment, is what makes his story so powerful. Because if Jonathan, who has every reason to be discouraged, can hold on to hope, then maybe we can too. Maybe your waiting season, your unanswered prayer, your aching loneliness isn't the end. Maybe it's the in-between, the sacred middle space where God is shaping you for the love you haven't met yet, for the purpose you don't fully understand yet, for the story that isn't finished yet. So the next time you watch Jonathan play Jesus on screen, remember the man behind the role. Remember the prayers he prays in private. Remember the tears he never shows the camera. Remember that what makes his performance powerful is not just his talent, but his sacrifice. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a little of your own story in his. The longing, the patience, the quiet faith. Because Jonathan's life is proof that being set apart doesn't mean being forgotten. It means being held for something sacred, something eternal, something worth the wait. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe our channel for more updates. Thanks.